Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today the subject of my lecture is defining a relative clause, which we also discussed in the previous lecture, and then we will move our attentions toward non-defining relative clause as well. But first, we will cover the leftover portion of the previous lecture, or you can say previous topic, that is defining relative clauses. You know that defining relative class defines or tells us something about the noun, the preceding noun or pronoun. All right. Or relative today, we will look at the use. First of all, we will start with the use, which we in which we use defining relative class with infinitives. You know, infinitive is the base form of verb plus two, or you can say two plus base form of verb, or you can also use infinitive sometimes without two. In those cases, we will call them bare infinitive. However, first of all, let's have a look at the examples or the first use. Infinitives can be used after the first, second, etc., and after the last only, and sometimes after superlatives as well. For example, the last man to leave the ship. Here, the last man to leave the ship can also be used like this. The last man who left or leaves the ship. All right. And this is the second example. It can also be used like this. For example, the last man, this is a noun here, and who left, this is a defining relative clause. And you can also write this defining relative clause in this way as well. And same is the case with the second example. Notice that the infinitive here replaces a subject, pronoun plus verb. It could not be used to replace an object, pronoun plus verb. All right. Although the infinitive can replace a subject, pronoun plus verb, here this is a subject pronoun. Who is a subject pronoun? Here, who is also a subject pronoun. All right. So infinitive can replace them. However, if there is an object pronoun plus verb, infinitive cannot replace them. For example, the clause in the first man that we saw could not be replaced by infinitive. So this clause cannot be replaced by infinitive. Why? You cannot call it for the first man to see. All right, you cannot use the first man to see for this clause because here that is because here that is not a subject pronoun. All right, so that is here an object pronoun. So we cannot replace infinitive, we cannot replace object pronoun plus verb with an infinitive, but we can replace subject pronoun like this with an infinitive like this. So if we write it like this, if we want to write it like this, the first man to see it, it would have a completely different meaning. If, however, that is the subject of a passive verb, for example, the first man that was seen, we can replace the clause by a passive infinitive. The first man to be seen. You can write the first man that was seen in this way as well. The first man to be seen. Of course, this is a passive structure, so it can be replaced here. That is object pronoun, but it can be replaced with this infinitive. Why? Because this is in passive form. Otherwise, you can replace subject pronoun plus verb with infinitive. Subject pronoun plus verb with infinitive. But you cannot replace object pronoun, this one, plus verb with infinitive. All right. But you can replace object pronoun plus verb only in case if it is in passive structure. Here in the next slide, we will look at when there is an idea of purpose or permission. He has a lot of books to read, all right? Books that he can or must read. So he has a lot of books to read. It does mean books that he can or must read. She had something to do. It does mean something that she could do or had to do. They need a garden to play in. uh, what sort of garden? A garden they can play in. So here we are not using defining relative classes, of course, but we can deduce the defining relative classes because here we can define them in this way. Books that he can or must read. All right. Defining relative classes, of course, define a noun, the preceding noun or a pronoun. So in this case, we are not using them, but we can deduce them. We can still infer the defining relative clauses here. Note that here the infinitive replaces a verb plus relative pronoun as subject in these examples. It might be thought that these two uses of the infinitive would lead to confusion, but in practice, this is very rare as the meaning of the infinitive is made clear by the rest of the sentence. Of course, you can also confuse it that in the use of infinitive in relative clauses is confusing, but actually it's not confusing, all right? It's very clear. By itself, the phrase the first man to see could mean either the first man that we must see here, the first man to see is infinitive here, all right? The first man to see could mean either the first man that we must see, or here man is the object, this the first man here, this is the object, or the first man who saw here in this example is in italic shape, all right? This one is also in italic shape, so have italicized the examples here. The first man who saw here, man is the subject, but when it is part of a sentence, we can see at once when which meaning is intended. For example, the first man to see is Tom. Here, it means that the first man that we must see is Tom. All right. So this to see is infinitive. It can also be written like this: the first man that we must see is Tom. This is typing mistake. Actually, it should be Tom. While the first man to see me was Tom. This to see is infinitive. It can be written as in this way as well. The first man who saw me was Tom. All right. So it can be replaced here as well. So we can either use pronoun, all right, that and who, or we can also use infinitive. Slide number 3, use number B. We have discussed use number A here, and here use number B. Present participles can be used. Present participle does mean ing form of the verb. When the verb is in the class, when the verb in the class is in the continuous tense. For example, people who were waiting or the bus often sorry, it's a typing mistake again here. Actually, this is not are, this is for, all right? People who are or were waiting for the bus often shelter or sheltered in my doorway. It does mean people waiting for the bus often shelter or sheltered in my doorway. So you can replace this present participle with this who are or who were as well. All right. This who is of course a defining relative clause, who are or who were waiting, but you can also replace it in this way as well. This would be informal. People waiting for the bus often shelter are sheltered in my doorway, or you can also write it in this way: people who are or were waiting for the bus often, etc. All right. And in the second example is the same. When the verb in the class expresses a habitual or continuous action. So this is another case. This is case number 2. People who travel or traveled on this bus buy or bought their tickets in books. All right. People traveling, you can call it like this: people traveling on this bus or buy or bought tickets in books. All right. You can replace this traveling, you can replace this defining relative class with traveling here when this who travel or travel shows an habitual or a continuous action. Boys who attend or attended this school have had to wear, you can write it like this: boy attending, etc. A law which forbids or forbade the import, you can change it into in this form as well: a law forbidding the import. A notice which warns or warned people, you can call it like this: a notice warning people. An advertisement which urges or urged, you can call it, you can write it like this as well: an advertisement urging, etc. Similarly, a petition asking, or you can say a letter ordering, demanding, telling, etc. A placard protesting, placards protesting, etc. Use number 3. When a verb in the class expresses a wish, that is, when the verb in the class is wish, desire, want, hope, but not like, etc. If these are the verbs, you can also change these verbs into ing form, or you can say present participle form. For example, if you use people who wish or wish to go on the tour, you can change it into this form: people wishing to go on the tour. This is a typing mistake. All right, this is too bad. Fans who hope or hoped for a glimpse of the star. Fans hoping for a glimpse of the star. All right. A non-defining clause, you can see this in the next slide. All right. A non-defining clause containing one of the verbs or any verb of the one of the verbs above. All right. Which verbs? The verbs like this: wish, uh, wish, desire, want, hope, etc. All right. If they contain one of these verbs: wish, hope, desire, etc., or the verbs like knowing or thinking, believe, expect, etc., they can similarly be replaced by a past participle. For example, Peter, who thought the journey. This is actually non-defining clause. We will define it in the next class. Sorry, in the next slide. People who thought the journey would take 2 days said dot dot dot. You can write it in this way: Peter, thinking the journey would take 2 days said. All right. You can also write it like this: Peter, who thought the journey would take 2 days said. Peter, thinking the journey would take 2 days said. Right. Tom, who expected to be paid the following week, offered. So this who expected to be paid the following week, this is a non-defining clause. All right. Or and it defines Tom. It defines a noun. You can also remove it as well. You can change this who expected to be paid in this form as well: Tom expecting to be paid the following week offered, except. So this is the definition of the non-defining relative clause. A non-defining relative clauses are placed after nouns. First of all, they are placed after noun first use, which are definite already. The nouns which are already definite, it does mean they do not need any definition. They 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 need not be defined, all right, by the clauses. So that's why we call them non-defining relative clauses, because they are defining, they are being placed after nouns which are already definite. So which do not need any definition. Still, if you put any relative clause after them, after definite noun, so that clause would become a non-defining relative clause. They do not therefore define the noun, but merely add something to it by giving some more information about it. Of course, they do not define the noun, but add something more information about the noun. Unlike defining relative clauses, they are not essential in the sentence and can be omitted without causing confusion. So, of course, defining relative clauses are necessary in the sentences and they cannot be omitted, but non-defining relative clauses are not that necessary, they are not that essential in the sentences, therefore they can be omitted without causing any disturbance or confusion. Also, unlike defining relative classes, they are separated from their noun by commas. All right, there is another difference between defining relative classes and non-defining relative classes, that they can be separated from the nouns by inserting commas. All right, whereas defining relative classes cannot be separated from their nouns by inserted commas. The pronoun can never be omitted in a non-defining relative class. So in this type of class, you cannot omit the noun. Whereas in defining relative classes, we see that we can we can omit uh, a pronoun in those classes. Whereas in these classes, you cannot omit pronouns. The construction is fairly formal and more common in written than in spoken English. So their construction is more formal in you can say written English and less formal in spoken English. So they are usually used for written English. Here, subject, object, possessive, for persons we use who in non-defining relative classes, and for object as subject, and for as object we use whom and who, and as possessive we use whose. Whereas for things we use which as subject and which as object as well, and whose are of which as possessive. Let's have a look at the examples. Subject who. No other pronoun is possible, not the commas. Here, my neighbor, this is a noun. Who is very pessimistic? This is non-defining relative clause. Look, we have separated it from its noun by inserting commas after noun and then after this clause as well. So we can even omit this clause in the sentence from the sentence without any confusion. So this is non-defining clause because it is defining such a noun which is already very definite. My neighbor. Which neighbor? My neighbor. So this has become definite already. My neighbor, although, so again some we are adding some more information to this neighbor, all right, in the form of non-defining relative clause. My neighbor, who is very pessimistic, says there will be no apples this year. So this who is very pessimistic in non-defining clause, which is defining this my neighbor. Same as the case with this example. Clauses such as these, which come immediately after the subject of the main clause, are found mainly in written English. In spoken English, we would be more likely to say. So we use these clauses in written English, but in spoken English, we use such clauses like this. For example, my neighbor is very pessimistic and says, so here this is formal structure and this is informal structure, and this structure is used in spoken English, whereas this structure is used in written English. But clauses placed after later in the sentence, that is clauses coming after the object of the main verb, are quite common in conversation. So such clauses are also quite common in conversation. For example, I have invited Anne who lives in the next flat. So this who lives in the next flat is an addition, is an extra information to this Anne. All right. So this clause is non-defining clause which has been separated from the noun with the help of a comma, all right, and which can also be omitted from the sentence as well without any confusion. I passed the letter to Peter, who was sitting beside me. This who was sitting beside me is non-defining relative clause and it defines Peter. In the next slide, we are stretching our discussion about non-defining relative clause. Use number B, object whom or who. First of all, we have discussed subject who for persons, and now we will discuss whom or who as objects for persons. All right. The pronouns cannot be omitted. Of course, we do not omit pronouns in such classes. Whom is the correct form? The who is sometimes used in conversation. Who we use who in conversations as object, all right. Whereas whom is the correct form. For example, Peter, whom everyone suspected, turned out to be innocent. So whom everyone suspected is a non-defining relative clause here which defines Peter. As noted above, a non-defining relative clause in this position is unusual in spoken English. We would be more likely to say, whereas if we want to say it in spoken English, in conversation, we will use it like this. Everyone suspected Peter, but he turned out to be innocent. We will not use this structure in conversation English. Peter, whom everyone suspected, turned out to be. We will use this structure in speaking, all right. Everyone suspected Peter, but he turned out to be innocent. But non-defining clauses coming after coming later in the sentence, that is after the object of the main verb or after preposition plus noun, are common in conversation as well. So this structure is also common in conversation. We structure preposition plus um, noun. She wanted Tom, whom she liked, all right, as a partner, but she got Jack. So she wanted Tom, whom she liked. So this is non-defining relative clause, which defines Tom. She wanted Tom, whom she liked, as a partner, but she got Jack. Whom she didn't like, she introduced me to her husband, whom I hadn't met before. So here, oh sorry, this whom she didn't like, this is the end of first example, all right. First example starts from she and ends at like. She wanted Tom, whom she liked, as a partner, but she got Jack, whom she did not like. This is the end of first example. So this is next example. She introduced me to her husband whom I hadn't met before. Right. This is the second example. Object of a preposition whom. So here whom is used with the preposition or as an object of a preposition, right? Mr. Jones, for whom I was working for. So here it is non-defining clause which has been used with preposition, or you can say object as an object of a preposition. Here whom is used as an object of preposition. Mr. Jones, for whom I was working, was very generous about overtime payments. It is, however, possible to move the preposition to the end of the clause as well. But of course, that is informal English, or this is and that is common in conversation. For example, Mr. Jones, who I was working for. This is not or, this is for, right? So here we have moved the preposition to the end of the sentence. So this is what we do in informal English or in conversation, right? We use preposition at the end of the sentence with who, all right? Whereas for whom or whom is a formal structure. Here Peter with whom, and here you can say Peter who I play tennis with on Sundays was fitter than me. This is the same, these are the same examples. Please check them on your own. Possessive whose. So here we are going towards possessive whose for persons. And whose children are at school all day is trying to get a job. So whose children, this is possessive, all right? And whose children are at school. So this is non-defining relative clause which tells us something about Anne. This is George, whose class you will be taking. Again, this whose is a possessive for person. Whose class you will be taking. This tells us something about George. In conversation, of course, we will say Anne's children are at school all day, so she. This is George, you will be taking his class, etc. This is the last slide for today's lecture. All, both, few, most, several, some, etc. plus of, plus whom or which. So you can also find this structure in non-defining relative clauses as well. This form can be used for both people and things. See examples below. For each, a more informal equivalent is given in brackets. Here are the examples of this structure. For example, all, both, few, more, several, some, etc. plus of, plus whom or which. For example, her sons, both of whom worked abroad, ring her up, etc. And this is also, you can say, uh, an informal equivalent of these sentences. So these sentences can be used in this way as well, but informally. He went with a group. He went with a group of people. Few of them, few of whom were, etc. Here you can also see all this structure in this example. In these example, most of which, yeah, several of whom, some of which, 10 of whom, etc. So this is the end of today's lecture. In the next lecture, we will cover our leftover non-defining example of leftover examples of our non-defining relative classes, and we will also touch upon our last kind of classes, that is connective relative classes as well. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any question, please ask me in the comments below.